What's up, everybody? This is Alex Christoforou with The Durad, and I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of TheDurad.com. And today we're going to be taking a look at Vladimir Putin's pension reforms. Alexander, today we're going to not talk about Putin in a foreign policy sense. We're going to talk about Putin with his domestic policy and a very controversial policy that he's going to be tackling. And it's controversial in any country you go to, and for Russia, doubly so. He's going to be tackling pension reform. And this, in many circles, people may think this is pretty mundane to be talking about this, because every country has their pension difficulties. But this is very important because it signals a couple of things about Vladimir Putin, the president, about his future, and about Russia. Tell our viewers what this signals, the fact that Vladimir Putin is ready to tackle the pension reforms in Russia.
I think this is an extremely important story, actually, not for itself. I mean, it's important for Russians, but for the outside world. It explains an awful lot about Vladimir Putin and about Russia. And what it shows to my mind, is why Vladimir Putin is so strong. Because what he has done in implementing this pension reform is the actions, not of a populist or of a demagogue or of a dictator or of somebody interested in himself, but of a very strong and responsible leader. Now, let us understand a few things. First of all, Russia needs to carry out a pension reform. People in Russia, as at the moment, men retire at 60, women retire at 55. Life expectancy, thanks to all the things Putin has done, is increasing rapidly. Before very long, life expectancy in Russia is expected to be around 80. I mean, it has grown by 8 years since he became president, and it's continuing to improve all the time. There is also a major demographic crisis, not of Putin's making, but the working age population is going to fall for a certain period of time because of the losses that Russia suffered in the 1990s, which means there were very few Russians were being born in the 1990s, so that there are fewer children in Russian schools at the moment and fewer Russians of working age joining the workforce, and they're not able to support the pension system at the present time. Now, as I said, the pension system needs reform, but the important point to understand, the key thing which separates Putin from the leader of any other country, is that though this is an important reform that needs to be made, it doesn't actually need to be made now. Russia has enough funds to continue to support the pension system out of its budget for at least another 7 years. After that 7 years, it could continue to support it by borrowing, which is what most countries do. 7 years from now, Vladimir Putin will no longer be president of Russia. His term will end and he is retiring. So it would be extremely easy for Putin to put this off, leave it for his successor to deal with. But instead of doing that, what he is doing is he's saying to the Russian people, this is the problem. I know it is unpopular. Raising the pension age, as you rightly said, is unpopular in every country. We must do it now. I will do it now when I am president of Russia. I am not going to leave it to my successor to sort out, because it is my responsibility to leave a good inheritance to whoever takes over from me, and this is why it has to happen. And he goes on television and he explains very carefully why it needs to be done. It won't make it popular. His own popularity as a result of this has taken a hit But I have no doubt the pension reform will succeed. In 7 years' time, Russia will be in a far stronger position than it would have been if he hadn't done it. And in the meantime, Russians, however unhappy they are about what he is doing, understand that he is right, and that is what makes him strong.
Is this a clear signal that that Putin is sending out, outside of showing that he's a responsible president and leader? Is this also a clear signal to the outside world, as well as to the domestic, to people inside of Russia domestically, that he will not be seeking any type of extension to his presidency when his term is up, in whatever form some of the people, the Western mainstream media, say dictator and this and that? Does this signal that at the end of his term, Vladimir Putin will follow the law, he will step down as president, and there will be a successor in place?
I don't have any doubt about it at all. He has said it repeatedly. He made it very clear before the election. As you correctly say, I think this move very clearly signals it now. I think one of the things that he set out to do when he was re-elected was that he was going to sort out all the remaining major problems which he has the authority as Russia's long-standing and most popular leader to sort out. He's going to sort them out. He's going to leave a good inheritance to his successor, so that when his successor takes over, he comes in with a clean slate and Russia in good shape. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I'm sure if the outside powers wanted to understand it, that is the signal he is giving them also. I don't think they are capable of understanding it, actually, because I think they have formed their own ideas about Putin, which are completely wrong. And I don't think anything that he can say or do is going to make them change it. I think, as I said, it is a very interesting and responsible measure, and contrast it what happens in other countries, where, as I said, these necessary steps are put off time and time again, so that when eventually things are sorted out, there is usually a crisis, and in the meantime, there is an enormous amount of debt piling up, which is then passed on to future generations to deal with. Russia has very little debt. It's now, I think, it's fallen further because Russia recently paid off one of its euro bonds. I think it's down to the 2007 levels. I think it's down to about 7% of GDP. And I mean, that is extraordinary compared with the situation in the United States, where it's heading for 100% of GDP. In Britain, I think it's around 80% of GDP. In Germany, it's around 60% of GDP. In Italy, it's 130% of GDP. In Japan, it's 250% of GDP. The reason that is so is because they don't have leaders who are prepared to grasp the nettle and do these things.
Yeah, I'm cracking a smile, and some of the viewers may see it, because as you're talking about this, I'm thinking me and you, being Greek, understand very well what it means when leaderships do not take responsibility, or, tell the people the difficulties of such thing as pension reforms, and then borrow in order to kick the can a little further down the road.
Exactly.
And then,
Exactly.
You look at Greece.
Exactly. But can I come back and say, this is why he is strong. This is why he is strong in Russia, because Russians see him and they understand that he is a strong leader, able to make difficult and unpopular decisions when they are necessary. In the West, we no longer have that anymore. There is an expression that Russians have, by the way, which is the power of decision. Putin has the power of decision. In the West, we no longer do.
It's tough love.
It's tough love.
It shows, I think it's tough love. It shows that he really does love his country, because he's going to spend a lot of the political capital that he has to make decisions for the good of the country, and it's not for the good of his ratings end of his position, but he's willing to make those decisions in order for the country to go through a smoother transition when the person that succeeds him, that wins the elections, when that does come to fruition. Now to touch upon the borrowing and the economic side of things, and we'll close out the segment on this note. How much of this do you think Putin is also doing to make sure that Russia does not fall into the trap of being dependent once again on U.S. or Western controlled financial markets? Because Russia has gone through a very painful but very long process of, you could say, decoupling from the West. And it's definitely on that path to being fully, independent of Western influence. So how much of this is also part of his plan to make sure that Russia has, when he's done, will not seek any assistance whatsoever from Western financial markets, even if they run into some economic difficulties with pensions or anything
I think
else?
I think that's a fundamental point, actually, because of course what the Russians have seen over the last couple of years, certainly since 2014, but arguably since long before then, is that the US especially is now weaponizing its control of the international financial markets. It is using them to destabilize economies of countries that it is in conflict with. And the Russians have experienced this. They saw what happened in 2014 when the ruble fell and there were sanctions which made it impossible for Russian companies to roll over their debts. They had to pay their debts off. And they were forced to. I mean, Putin ensured that they did. But what he wants to do is he wants to create a situation where the Russian government's finances are impregnable so that it doesn't have to borrow. It doesn't have to borrow internally in rubles, and it doesn't have to borrow externally in dollars. And I think the point to understand is that the two are connected because, of course, a government that borrows internally in rubles in Russia, obviously, the Russian government can do that to a certain degree. But because Russian financial markets are underdeveloped, it can only do so up to a certain point. So by limiting the amount of borrowing that it does internally, it allows space for Russia's own financial services industries to develop, for its banks to become stronger, for savings to grow, for financial instruments to be created, for stability and depth in the financial system to emerge, so that in any kind of situation, it can stand on its own feet. Russia can stand on its own feet without being vulnerable to economic and financial destabilization from the West. I think this is an absolutely clear part of his agenda. I mean, he has spoken about it. I don't think there's any question about it. And I think that here again, we see that he is aiming to give his successor the best possible inheritance and to put Russia in the strongest possible position in the future. And if, in the meantime, his popularity takes a certain hit, well, he's confident and strong enough to absorb it.
Yeah, these are the trademarks of a good leader, a good manager, a good CEO, someone that when they're ready to step down, when they're ready to move on, they make sure that the person that's going to come in and succeed them really has as smooth of a transition as possible. And I think you're exactly spot on, Alexander, that Vladimir Putin is doing everything in his power to make sure that both domestically and foreign policy-wise, everything has been tied up as best as possible.
Absolutely.
Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of The Duran, thank you for a fascinating story on Putin and pension reforms in Russia. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And please visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, buy a t-shirt, help us broadcast news stories like this to you. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of The Duran, thank you very much. Until next time, take care.